This week, a mother screams, "You're breaking my arm," as police drag her from her own home. No warrant, no charges, no court order. Just a powerful attorney and a plan called granny napping. A shocking case that proves your rights can vanish in an instant, even in America. Could your family be next? You don't want to miss it. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another episode of the Brian Nichols Show. We're getting right in to our guest conversation today. It's a little bit different of a conversation. Rather, we're really digging into some personal stories and helping show the human cost of public policy or public inaction. So to discuss all that and more, joining us today, Jonathan Farley. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How are you?
I'm doing well under the circumstances. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan, let's dig right into that. You said under the circumstances. What are those circumstances?
Well, my mother passed away last month, but the circumstances that led to her passing away started on or after January 19, 2023. A woman named Mary Ho was put in my mother's house. And who put her in my mother's house? My brother, Chris Farley. My mother didn't want to be living with Mary Ho and said so. In fact, a strange thing happened on January 22nd, 2023. A friend of my mother's from my mother's church and my church wanted to see my mother in my mother's own house. And this Mary Ho stopped her, wouldn't let my mother's friend even talk to my mother. Mary Ho said, "She's not on the list." And I was thinking, what list? My brother Chris had created some list of people who could talk to my mother and no one else could. Well, I actually lived in this house, but I taught in another city. I'm a university professor. And so I came back to the village where we live and where I am now to see what was going on. And Mary Ho then left. Her stuff was still in my mother's house. She had 50 boxes of her own in my mother's garage, and she had taken over about 4 rooms in our house. She'd even moved my mother from the bedroom where my mother slept in to another room. And even in that other room, Mary Ho had put 2 gigantic suitcases of her own, Mary's, in the room that she'd put my mother in. These suitcases were so big, I'd never even attempted to lift a suitcase this big in my entire life. And there were 2 of them. Well, the next day, January 29, 2023, my mother and I went to the local sheriff's office to make a police report. They said it wasn't really a police matter, but we made the report. My mother had called Mary Ho to say, leave, don't come back, except to remove your belongings, and only do that under when we have arranged a time to do it. Well, instead, 2 days later, January 31st, 2023, Mary Ho did come. She came with police and my brother Chris and another brother of mine named Anthony, who had not seen my mother more than 3 times in 5 years. And they took my mother. They kidnapped her. Now, you can see the original police video of this on the webpage inafarleyjan31.com. I am shouting at police, "Does my mother have to go with you?" And they evade the answer. My mother is saying, "I have to see my lawyer." She was never allowed to see a lawyer. But in actuality, despite what it looked like, I did not know that they were there to take my mother. I found that out later. When my mother didn't return, the police had told me, "Oh, my brothers are taking her out to dinner and or maybe just for a drive." So I reported or tried to report that my mother was missing 2 days later. The police to this day will not even allow me to report this as a crime. But I spoke with a policeman, a Sergeant Mazenga, and said, I wanted to know where my mother was. He would not tell me where my mother was, nor would he tell me why he was not telling me where my mother was. Well, I happened to know that my mother was supposed to meet up with another friend of hers on February 5. This would have been 5 days after the initial kidnapping. And so I just happened to hope and guess that my mother was going to be there. And in fact, my mother was there with Mary Ho. And I went up to my mother and said, Mary Ho helped kidnap you 5 days before. Now, my mother did have a memory problem. She could not typically remember what happened the day before, 24 hours before, but she could reason, she could have discussions. In fact, before this kidnapping, I spoke with my mother every day or almost every day for years, usually about complex topics like the news, current events, or my personal life. So she was not mentally incompetent. No judge had said she was mentally incompetent. No doctor had said she was mentally incompetent. She was a free person. She was the only person who owned the house. My late father and my mother were the only people whose names were on the deed for the house. My mother and I were the only legal residents of the house. Mary Ho had only been there about 8 or 9 days, and my mother didn't want her there anyway and had told her to leave. My brother Chris lived hundreds of miles away. My brother Anthony lived hundreds of miles away. They had no legal authority to do any of this. My mother was a free person. Well, on February 5, when I saw my mother, she said immediately, "Let's go." She told Mary Ho to step aside. Mary Ho refused to budge, and then, in fact, Mary Ho called 911. So, can you imagine? Mary Ho, a kidnapper and a trespasser, gets to call the police on me because my mother wants to leave, but I am not allowed to file a police report on Mary Ho or on anybody else. Can you imagine this? Well, my mother just barreled past Mary Ho, and I asked my mother, do you want to stay? Do you want to drive around, or do you want to go back to the house? My mother made the decision to go back to the house. And then about 15 minutes later, police came to our house. And you can see on the YouTube channel, Free Ina Farley, which is also on the screen next to my name, that my mother is telling police, I'm happy now. I didn't know who those other people were that I was with before, but I want to be here with my son, Jonathan, under his care and guidance. So I have a third brother, Felipe, who is an attorney. And Felipe tells me that this statement of my mother's in and of itself should warrant a revocation of the power of attorney that my brother Chris claimed. Now, my brother Chris claimed to have been given power of attorney by my parents in 2008, 15 years before all of this happened. I don't know if that's true or not, but even if it's true, power of attorney doesn't give you the right to make somebody else your slave. It doesn't give you the right to steal their house, right? That's a big misunderstanding that many people have. It should be obvious, but it's a big misunderstanding many people have. So there's 2 hours of this. You can see all the footage on the webpage inafarleyfeb5.com and inafarleytaken.com of the police calmly speaking to my mother saying, I'm fine here. And at this point, the police are breaking the law. They should have left. The sole homeowner and the sole 2 residents of the house are telling them everything is fine, go. And they remain. So after about an hour, the police, and we can see this on the police body camera footage, they come up with this plot. And they say, okay, you have to take certain pills at 5 p.m. And so you don't have those pills in the house, the police said, and so we have to take you. Well, for starters, I don't know of any law that gives the police the authority to take someone to take medicine. And my mother is understandably perplexed. Ironically, the only person besides myself making sense in that house that day was my mother, the person that they were claiming couldn't make decisions for herself. This was a lie, incidentally. She had every right to make decisions for herself. No court had said she could not do so. So my mother is saying, well, what pills? And my doctor has not told me about any pills, which in fact was the case. And my mother is saying to the police, and you can see this on the video, any pills that you say I have to take, I have to run by my doctor, or I have to run by my sister. My mother's sister used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and she can ask, my mother said, her younger colleagues about any such pills. So we were confused about what these pills were, because my mother took pills for, like vitamin C. She took pills for high blood pressure, pills for diabetes. She took Prevagen and over-the-counter medicine for your memory, stuff like that. That's all that she took. and she always took it. And I told the police, and you can hear my voice on the police body camera footage, telling the police, we have those pills in our house. They're on the kitchen table. And in fact, your audience can see the pills. If you go to the January 31st footage at inafarleyjan31.com, you can see a tray of pills on our kitchen table. And I've left them there a year and a half later, and I may leave them there forever because they're an indication that my mother was taking her pills. The pills are in the house, and they're next to a book of Sudoku puzzles that my mother was working on. Do you know anyone mentally incompetent who can do Sudoku puzzles? So, but I also want to stress, my mother had not been declared mentally incompetent by any judge or by any doctor, and she was not mentally incompetent. But I told the police the pills are in the house, and you can hear it on the footage. So the police eventually conceded to us that these aren't any new pills she has to take. It's the same old pills for high blood pressure. Well, then the pills are in the house. And I don't know that the police have any authority to force you to take pills anyway, particularly without consulting anyone first. But after, when it hits 5 p.m., and my mother's pills were not supposed to be taken at any particular time either. And none of the pills were such that if you did not take them, you would die within days or even hours or even days. But they just use force. So they didn't do it exactly at 5 p.m. That was the trigger time. But around 5:30 p.m., they just grabbed my mother and used force. And she's screaming, "You're breaking my arm." They tie up her hands and feet, and they drag her out. And I didn't see her again for 8 months. This was simply a kidnapping. It had nothing to do with really my mother's memory. That was an excuse that was given. For starters, your audience, those of you who do research, can just tell me, has anyone ever been locked up against her will because she couldn't remember what happened 24 hours before? I'd be surprised if this has ever happened in the modern history of New York State, where I am now. But regardless, my mother was simply kidnapped in a way that a 35-year-old woman could have been kidnapped. Because when they took her, all they did is physically overpower her. That was it. This could happen to anyone with no legal authority. So where did they take her? I did not know for 5 weeks. How is that? Is this the United States? Or was this a gulag in the Soviet Union where someone could be taken in night and fog and hidden? Even a mass murderer cannot be hidden legally in the United States. If a criminal is arrested, we know where they are. You can go to the Bureau of Prisons website and look up where they are. You could probably even visit that person. My mother was hidden by the police. I don't know under what law this was legal, and I suspect that it was not. It certainly didn't. It certainly was not justified in any fashion. And my brother concedes why he hid her location. He admitted that he did not want her to change her power of attorney. Now, I want to point out that when my mother was kidnapped by the police under the direction of my brother, and you can hear his voice speaking to police on the telephone on February 5, 2023, and on January 31st, 2023, he's right there. There was no court case going on. So there is a process by which you can lose your rights. It's called a guardianship. That's one of them, a guardianship. There was no guardianship case going on when my mother was kidnapped. So it was just a straight up kidnapping. I'm not exaggerating. People might think, well, maybe there must be something else happening because we know this doesn't happen in the United States. And all of that, if that's how people are thinking, that allowed my brother to succeed in this crime, because no one then followed up and said, okay, maybe there's something else happening. Can he tell it to us what else is happening? And can he prove it? He was never even asked to explain. He just came in and took her. They just tied up her hands and feet on his say-so. It's incredible. And to this day, he's allowed to do this. No charges have been filed. There's been no investigation.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But After using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80, and my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s, and I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
So, my brother did start a guardianship case a week or two after the kidnapping. There were these two kidnappings, one without overt force, at least not caught on camera, the other with overt force caught on camera. Well, when he started that guardianship case, he told the judge that he did not want my mother's location disclosed, so she could not change her power of attorney. So my mother, a free human being, because you don't lose your rights if you're 84, and you don't lose your rights if you can't remember what happened 24 hours ago. My mother was deprived of her basic rights under the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Her human rights. She was locked away, not allowed to make phone calls, not allowed to select an attorney, not allowed to receive visitors of her choosing, and mail sent to her was blocked. This was all in violation, incidentally, of the New York State Department of Health's Rights of Residents of Assisted Living Facilities, which says a resident of an assisted living facility must be allowed to see whomever she chooses, and the facility is not allowed to block anyone from seeing her or allow any agent to do so. And moreover, they cannot bar mail from getting to her. But my brother officially has admitted in court that he was blocking mail from coming to her. So this was an extreme violation of her rights, because even though there is this process of being able to strip someone of her rights called a guardianship, you also obviously have the right to appeal, to protest, and my mother was denied that right. In fact, she was given a court-appointed attorney. She had a lawyer. Nobody ever asked her, of course, and nobody asked me. But they gave her a court-appointed attorney, and that court-appointed attorney said that my mother should not even know that there is a court case going on. So he wasn't representing her, even though she'd just been kidnapped. This should not even have been a civil case. It should have been, and should be again, it should be a criminal case where my brother Chris Farley is arrested, my brother Anthony Farley is arrested, and the police who took my mother are arrested, and the ambulance workers who tied up my mother's hands and feet are arrested, and the people who ran the facility where they put my mother, a memory care facility, are arrested for false imprisonment. After 5 weeks or a month or 5 weeks after the kidnapping of my mother, the judge in the guardianship case that started a week or two after the kidnapping named my brother Chris a temporary guardian. At that point, maybe legally they can do these insane things with my mother, but that means for 5 weeks, my mother was simply a hostage, just like in Beirut or Gaza. My mother was simply a hostage, being tied up and prevented from making phone calls, prevented from contacting an attorney, and not allowed to receive visitors of her choice. Now you might think, oh, okay, was I was barred? Okay, was it just me? No, it was you. You were barred. You didn't know it, but you were barred from seeing my mother and everyone in your audience because my brother had drawn up a list of people, and only those people. It was when I subpoenaed the list, it had 17 names on it, but it might have had as few as 8 names at one point. When that list of 17 people was the list of the people who could see my mother or even telephone her from the outside. So only 17 people were allowed to see or even telephone my mother. And the instructions on the list are explicit, and they say, if anyone else calls, you're not even to give any information that Ina Farley is here. And no explanation has been given to this day for why Ina Farley was isolated like this. Incidentally, the Surgeon General says isolation is a threat to your health. That was one of the problems with the pandemic. And here my mother was isolated for a year like this. Fortunately, there was one name on that list of a person who I was in contact with, and she made about half a dozen videos of my mother while she was falsely imprisoned in this facility for a year. And those videos show my mother. She looks like she has aged years. She has deteriorated. You can see this darkness creeping up her legs, which didn't exist before the kidnapping. A doctor said that this looked like diabetes out of control. So it wasn't like she was in this facility for her health, even though that was obviously the false claim. But my mother is having cogent conversations. So again, she looks terrible, she sounds terrible, but no one can hear her speak with the woman who made the videos and say that my mother is mentally incompetent. But regardless, I want to emphasize for your viewers that my mother still had not been declared mentally incompetent. So she was treated as if she was, but legally, no doctor had said she's mentally incompetent, and no judge had said she was mentally incompetent. They were just locking her up. And I don't have a lot of documents even now, but as far as I know, she did not even leave that facility for a year. It's a facility so small that you can walk around it in 5 minutes. And I misspoke. As far as I know, she only left that facility once in 1 year for a court appearance.
Wow.
And never again, as far as we know. And here's the issue. Why don't I know? Why don't we know? How can a human being be taken and we don't know these basic facts? I want to go back to the period between January 31st, 2023, the first kidnapping, and February 5, 2023, the violent kidnapping, the second kidnapping, which was with overt violence. To this day, we don't know where she was. How is that? They took her. I have one record that claims she was put in a hotel. Okay, if so, how did they keep her from leaving? Did they lock the door on her? Is that legal? Did they cut the hotel rooms have telephones? Did they unplug the phone? Did they post a policeman outside her door? How is any of this legal? My mother had less rights than a mass murderer. A mass murderer has the right to make phone calls. A mass murderer has the right to get an attorney. A mass murderer has the right to receive visitors of his choosing. My mother had none of these rights without having been accused of a crime and without having been declared mentally incompetent by a judge or by a doctor. Just because my brother Chris said to do all of this, and he was not her guardian, because before he was named temporary guardian, there was no guardian. He had a power of attorney, true, but as I already indicated, a power of attorney doesn't make you the owner, the slave owner of another person. And he had something called healthcare proxy. But if you read the healthcare proxy document, it explicitly says it only gives power to Chris if my mother is terminally ill, permanently unconscious, or has a permanent brain injury and will never again regain the ability to express her wishes. Well, none of those 3 conditions applied. In fact, my mother expressed her wishes, not just in the videos that we have from when she was falsely imprisoned at the memory care facility, which is called Cranberry Landing, but also when she was being dragged out of the house. In the first nonviolent kidnapping, she's saying, I do not want to leave my property. They took her from the property. In the second violent kidnapping, she's telling police, leave my house. So she's making her wishes pretty clear. And we have records from the facility itself that my mother was telling them, call the police. I'm a prisoner here. My family's trying to steal my house, which in fact was the case. My family's trying to steal my house. I'm being treated like a dog. Well, so that's from the facility's own records. So it's all crystal clear. This was simply a case of a kidnapping, aided and abetted by a surrogate court judge named Christopher Ciaccio, CIACCIO. But remember, there was no court case going on when my mother was taken. That started later. So I don't know what immunity judges have, but everybody else involved, the police, the ambulance workers, and two of my brothers, should just be arrested. And they can have their day in court, but they need to be arrested. Now, I have a third brother, Felipe. He was not openly involved, but he did date Mary Ho. He used to date her. Now, what about the house? So Mary Ho, a week after the violent kidnapping, somehow knew when I was leaving the house. I left the house, and somehow she knew, and then came with police, apparently, according to a police report I later got, and removed her belongings from the house. And she stole some of our stuff as well. Don't know where my mother's passport is and other private documents. So imagine that. The police are, now Mary Ho had a key, but still, the only two residents of the house are gone and unaware of this person coming to our house and taking stuff. And the police are aware of it and let it happen. They may even have been there when it happened. Can you imagine that? Incredible. And then in the court case, my brothers were insisting on trying to sell the house, even though they didn't have the legal authority to do so. And the judge was trying to aid and abet them in doing so. Fortunately, they didn't succeed. But my mother, the person who's supposed to be mentally incompetent, although she wasn't declared so, could see that this is what was happening, that someone is trying, that her family is trying to steal her house. In fact, you can find what, well, despite the circumstances, what would otherwise be a funny moment where my brother Anthony is telling my mother no one's trying to take her house, when he knew exactly that that's what he was trying to do. And Mary Ho on police body camera footage is telling the police that she's taking the house, that my mother's going to be removed permanently that day. I will be locked out of my own house, and she, Mary Ho, is taking the house. And the police are right there talking to her about this, agreeing with it, it sounds like, while she is telling them a criminal plan that the police are aiding and abetting. Because even if you just view this as a kind of eviction, which it was worse than that, my mother was screaming, "You're breaking my arm." So it was worse than an eviction. But even if you just view it as an eviction, all of this is illegal. In New York State, there was a case last year of a homeowner who could not change the locks on squatters. Some squatters had occupied the house she owned. She tried to change the locks and the police arrested her. So that's how extreme the situation is for the rights of even squatters in America. Here we have a situation where the homeowner is removed by force. The only other sole legal resident is kicked out of the house, although I was able to go back. And the police are speaking with a woman who's not a resident. She was kicked out by the homeowner. And the non-resident, Mary Ho, is telling them that, yeah, I'm going to take the house and change the locks on the legal resident, me. Something that would be illegal even if she were the landlord, that would be illegal. But she wasn't the landlord; she was a trespasser. Well, as I said, that's the least bad thing that happened. What really happened that was far worse was my mother was drugged. She was drugged against her will. How do we know this? From the records of the facility itself. So remember, before this, she took pills she took vitamin C, pills for high blood pressure, and Prevagen. At the facility, they gave her drugs that even the FDA said should not be given to people in her demographic because they increased the risk of death. And they also increased confusion. So here she is in a memory care facility, and they're giving her drugs that increase confusion. You might almost think that that was their intention. And since then, I found out, I don't know why the police are pretending they didn't know what was going on, because this is apparently a common thing. And this is where I want to help your viewers so it doesn't happen to your mother or your grandmother. There's something called granny napping. This is apparently it's so common, there's even a word for it. And I was told by an expert that what they do is they isolate, medicate, and liquidate. Or another person said that they isolate the victim, they then defame all protectors, and then they loot the estate. And that's what happened to my mother. So fortunately, after 1 year in court, my attorney, who is my father's cousin, Jane Farley, was able to fight my brother's high-priced attorney. Apparently, my brother spent $300,000 in legal fees. And so the question is, why did he spend $300,000? Our house is worth half that. A nurse a full-time nurse might be 60, 70,000. I don't know. Why did he find it so important to spend $300,000 to keep my mother locked up? But my father's cousin was able to get the judge to revoke Chris Farley's temporary guardianship. He still held on to my mother for another 2 months, and then I was able to see her for the second time in over a year, for more than the first time was for 40 minutes in 1 year, and her brain had been destroyed. She was not at all the way she was when they kidnapped her, when I was, as I said, having these conversations with her every day about sometimes complex issues like the news. But she was still on the drugs that Christopher's doctors had been giving her, and she stayed on that. She wasn't freed from the guardianship. She was simply given a new guardian, my brother Felipe, who used to date one of the kidnappers, Mary Ho. So he did nothing, very little, to help my mother other than allow her to see people for the first time in a year, pretty much. There was no longer any list, but her brain had been destroyed. He did not stop her from being given these drugs that obviously were messing up her brain. He claims that he told the doctors after he found out about them that she was allergic, but she wasn't allergic. She just should not have been given those drugs. And whenever I spoke with her after that, with maybe 2 exceptions, she was always very confused. And that's how she was for the last 6 months of her life. But worse, even though it turned out to be illegal for the judge to bar my mother from returning to her own home, which is what the judge did, not a medical doctor, a judge, right? My brother Felipe, instead of fighting that, just conceded it and let my mother be kept away from her home, kept away from her church, and left in another memory care facility where she died alone on a cot in a small room, 1,000 miles away from her home, from her church. And consequently, of course, her friends couldn't visit her very easily if she's 1,000 miles away from them. And that's how this godly woman ended her life. Now, what about the resources? I said liquidate the estate. Well, I have proof from my mother's bank that 10 days before she died, she had less than $6,100 in her bank accounts. But on April 6th, 2024, she had $197,000. So where did that money go? Only 2 people had access to it. My mother obviously didn't. She was locked up, or she was in a nursing home. My brother Felipe and my brother Chris. Felipe dated Mary Ho, and Chris was the one who instigated the kidnapping in the first place. Will anything be done about this? And even the $197,000 was far too low. I did a back of the envelope calculation, and it's almost mathematically impossible for my mother to have had even $197,000, given her income, given my father's income, given their pensions. There's no way that they could have that little unless it had been taken. And who had the authority to take it? Only my mother and Chris Farley. And but will anything be done about it? Could you just lock up someone and steal their money and get away with it scot-free? And it looks like you can in the United States. The sheriff for the county where I am has not replied to any of my 10 messages, any of my 10 letters that I've sent him. The district attorney, some of you may have seen on the news because she was disgraced recently, but she's still in office. Her name is Sandra Dorley. I have not heard from her office in a year and a half, over a year and a half. I tried to get the New York State Attorney General to investigate the police misconduct. They told me that they were not going to investigate. Not that there was no misconduct, but that they were not going to investigate. This is the easiest case in the world to investigate. Your viewers can go to the YouTube channel for Ian and Farley and watch these videos. And if you want to see the original police videos, you can go to the other websites that I named and see that an 84-year-old woman was violently ripped from her home and her hands and feet tied up, screaming, "You're breaking my arm." So the only justification for that would have to be that the police had some legal authority to do it, and a one-day investigation will turn up that they had no legal authority. They had no warrant. She was not accused of any crime. She's not a danger to herself and others. You can see her calmly speaking to police for 2 hours. And the police themselves are saying on video, there's no urgency, which tells me there's no emergency. The only other option is that they have some order from a court, from a judge, which they did not have because there was no court case going on. They had no declaration of mental incompetence by a judge or by a doctor. And my mother was not mentally incompetent. So this is maybe a unique case in the modern history of New York State. I'd love for people to investigate to see if it is. But what can we do in the future? Well, I actually contacted the local libertarians, and I told, but I never got a reply. You would think that this would be an issue that they would care about. Like, this is government.
I'll see what I can do for you, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks. This is government overreach.
Yes.
But it's more than that. It's not just government overreach, because even under the current laws, what happened was a simple crime. It's just that suddenly they decided to ignore the rights of a woman because she was 84 years old. Right? That was it. That's the only reason. Because she's 84. They're taking her, did not have to do with her memory, because it had to do with them physically overpowering an 84-year-old woman.
If you think you're supporting small farms with your coffee choices, think again. Many brands hide behind fancy packaging while sourcing cheap coffee beans. So you need to stop compromising on quality and on ethics. Clockham Craft Coffee was born from a desire for both transparency and excellence in the coffee game. They personally select every bean, ensuring top quality and fair practices. So experience coffee the way it's supposed to be. Honest, delicious, and roasted with care. Plus, an exclusive offer for Brian Nichols Show fans. Use code BNS10 for 10% off at clockhamcraft.coffee. Link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show.
And then they're hoping that maybe she would forget things, but an employee of Cranberry Landing actually told me that this is the memory care facility, actually told me that my mother recited how she'd been taken from her house every day. And the other employees laughed. But they did more than laugh. I got a video of my mother with blood in her eye and 2 giant bruises on both sides of her face. And in the video, she's complaining about pain in her chin. And she told the person who made the video that she had been beaten by an employee of the facility. So my mother was subjected to torture, abuse. She was drugged, isolated, not told what was going on. It was a horror. That was the last year and a half of her life. And yes, for the last 6 months, I could finally see her, but her brain had been mashed up. And since I was not the guardian or temporary guardian, I could not get her off those drugs, the drugs that they ostensibly gave her, but they were really behavior control drugs to keep her from complaining, I guess. I could not get them off. I could not tell them to stop. I could not take her from that facility and put her back in her house. I was trying to stop my brother Chris, who was continuing his legal action, this time against my brother Felipe. Nobody thought this was fishy, that Chris is trying to take legal action against everybody, until my mother passed away. And this is what we pay our taxes for. I paid taxes for these cops who tied up my mother's hands and feet and hurt her so badly she was screaming, "You're breaking my arm," and then hid her for 5 weeks and then left her locked up. I paid taxes for that. So how can we stop it? Well, I still want there to be an investigation into the actions of the police and my brothers, of course. So if your viewers could contact the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, and just tell her to look at the Ina Farley video. It's been viewed over 1 million times now, the video of the violence. And hopefully Letitia James will see it. Obviously her staff isn't going to do anything, but it looks like if she sees it herself, maybe she will take some action. And in the future, we do need to insist that people like these police, whether you want to back the blue or not, have to be arrested. They're no longer the blue when they commit a crime. They're the same as any criminal who ties somebody up and commits assault and battery, because they had no legal authority to do it. They just heard one person say to do it, and they did it. I mean, I can't call them up and tell them to lock up my neighbor, because you're not supposed to be able to.
There is, so from your story today, and by the way, for the Brian Nichols Show, we've got well over 900 episodes here of the show. And I think what the audience is going to be able to take away from today's episode is very much reoccurring themes that we've heard over the past several years of the Brian Nichols Show, but all kind of coming together in one episode. And specifically to what you outlined as we were wrapping things up here is the monopoly on violence, right? The monopoly on force.
Yeah.
And the idea that one entity in this place, because they have a badge, right, can now serve as the arbiter of all things that are true and factual without having some type of third-party oversight or just maybe some common sense, dare I say?
Yes. In fact, the way it's supposed to work is before you can strip someone of her rights, besides the fact that she's entitled to an appeal, which my mother was not given, and a lawyer, which my mother was not allowed to select for herself, there's supposed to be 2 psychiatrists or psychologists who are supposed to evaluate a person who's about to be stripped of her rights. And that never happened. Or if it did happen, it happened 10 months after she'd been drugged and locked away and isolated. So even the system was not followed.
Well, and I guess that speaks to why it's important to have the right people in those positions, or just start to question, why do we have these institutions that are given such unilateral authority, and that they're supposed to be folks overseeing this that many times don't. And I think this right here, this is the takeaway beyond obviously folks going and watching the video, reaching out to Letitia James, telling her what you see right there on the video for yourself that she can see for herself. I mean, this is a reoccurring theme that it doesn't stop, Jonathan, and much like what you're doing here today, until we raise it up enough so more and more folks see what's actually happening and get pissed off about it, because this should not be normal. It sounds like what I'm sure the audience, it sounds like this went from a family feud more or less into a full-on using government to steal somebody's property and more or less put somebody in jail, right? But it's a nursing home, and this is where unfortunately your mother had to spend the last few years of her life. And I think everybody sitting here today listening to this episode can very much empathetically put themselves in your shoes. We see exactly the situation you went through, and nobody wants to go through that for their families. So this is very important, Jonathan. I want people to have a call to action. New York libertarians, I'm looking at you. I'm going to go ahead and give many phone calls here after our conversation today. But how about this, Jonathan, as we wrap things up here? Give the audience a nice, clear call to action. What are some quick action items beyond reaching out to Letitia James, beyond trying to hold these members who took part in this horrible act against your mother, holding them to account? What are some other call to actions we could do? And maybe some folks who want to make sure they see if there is any resolution to this, where could they go ahead, keep an ear to the case and just better understand what's going on there?
So what you can do is go to the YouTube channel, Free Ina Farley. But also, if your audience knows a lawyer who not only wants to do good, get justice for an elderly woman who was abused at the end of her life, but also make money for himself, the American way, please let me know, because an attorney who sues the facility or who sues the police is going to win. I was stymied by the judge in the guardianship case at every turn, but with any other judge, we win the case. So if you have a friend who's an attorney, or if you're an attorney and you want to win an easy case, please contact me.
All right, there we go. There is our call to action. Jonathan Farley, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry, again, it wasn't under different circumstances. We're going to have you back on in the future. I know you got quite a history in the world of mathematics that we're going to have to dig into next time. So let's maybe have a positive conversation down the road. But for today's conversation, a very clear call to action, folks, based on a very unfortunate, I'd say unfortunate, just downright awful situation that Jonathan's family has found, taking place right now. So please go ahead, reach out to Letitia James, tell them to go watch the video. And yeah, hey, I know I got lots of legal friends in the audience. So if you're listening to this case and you're saying, please reach out to Jonathan. All links there in the show notes. Jonathan Farley, thank you for joining us. And with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.